Welcome to Civil War Digital Digest. I'm Will. I'm really excited to bring this episode to you today. It's one I've been looking forward to for a couple of years now. We're going into the book from Harmon Camburn and going to one of his experiences. This is going to be a recipe, but it's not a recipe out of a cookbook. Harmon wrote it down and told a story. Let me set the stage for you. It's December 1861. Camburn is a sergeant, has been set out on picket with 40 men, and they're kept there an extra day. It had rained badly the night before, and he needed to make sure the men were cared for. He knew the house belonging to the estate, in his words, was close by. So this is what Camburn does.
With the prospect before us of remaining overnight in our present position, we turned our attention to providing for the inner man, selecting a couple of men that I had observed to be equal to most any emergency. I requested them to procure some potatoes and cabbage and a kettle. They soon returned with a good supply of vegetables and a 3-pail iron kettle, collecting from each man his ration of bacon and as many hardtack as we needed. We soon had a wonderful mixture boiling over a good fire. When our stew was sufficiently cooked, each man helped himself directly from the kettle.
Well, as we listen to the story, we hear 3 really important lessons as we learn about the Union infantry and the Civil War and infantry in general. First, we've got a recipe that we can make, and that's the focus of today. Second, you see Camburn getting bacon from each man's rations and crackers from each man's rations. The infantry as a community and the men are going to exist together. And third, take a look at what this NCO did to care for his men and make sure that while they were on duty on picket defending the army, they had food ready for them. So helping me today here is our buddy Chad, and he's bringing stuff in. All right. Heavier than we'd take in the field. A civilian cast iron pot's going to be great. Let's find somewhere nearby. We'll find a piece of plank so that we can use it as a cutting surface. And then once we're in here, we need to collect the bacon from each man's ration. I've got mine, and I've got a knife here. All right, great. There's enough for the fellas. And then we're going to send Chad to find a little bit more firewood because this is going to need to cook for a while. Remember, Camburn talked about men being through this all night. While he does that, I'm going to get started. We're going to cut our bacon up into chunks, and we're going to throw it in the pot. All right, well, as I finish cutting up the bacon, here we go. You can see one person's working on getting the supplies. Some of the men are out on guard. Another person's working on cooking. Even if there's not an official Army cook, working together just makes sense to make existence easier. My first instinct had been that it would have been salt pork, but Camburn said it's bacon, so we're gonna make this with bacon. Today, we're using just a little over 2 pounds of bacon for this. It's just a matter not so much per the recipe, because remember, there's no measurements here. It's just what we have, and then I'm also going to make it for what fits in this pot. Once the bacon's cut up, I'm going to move on to the potatoes and to the cabbage. Looking at the size of the pot, would you grab 3 crackers from each man, please?
Yes, Sergeant.
Thank you. Tell you what, in case we need to run and get more water, let's start pulling the canteens. Let's get that some in here. Go ahead and use all of mine too.
Okay.
The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add the cabbage. Now, if you're used to cooking at home and you go, wait a second, the potatoes are going to take a little while, the pork a little bit more, the cabbage will take way less. Wait, put it in. This is a soldier's soup, and remember, Camburn refers to this as chowder, so we're going to let everything cook down nice and thick. So I'm okay putting the cabbage in right now. A little bit different than you're used to today, but this is the soldier's experience. All right, the last thing that we're gonna add is the hardtack. This will go in as everything cooks down. It'll just start to gel together and make that chowder that Camburn talked about. I'm going to check with Chad when he gets back from water detail and see if maybe he has some salt and pepper in his haversack. If we can add a little bit of seasoning, that'll help us. If it's a musket butt, if it's the back of a hatchet, if it's a cup, whatever we need to break up the crackers and get them in, we're going to do. We're going to get this stew put on the fire and let it start to cook. Little pepper, little salt, because we have it. The three-legged pot is going to let us get on top of the coals, let it start to cook. Now remember, we're going for a chowder, which means it's going to be fairly thick. The problem with that is it's going to burn in the pot. Soldiers would learn this by experience. I can just tell you right now, once it starts to heat up, you need to keep stirring this. If the soldiers had been issued salt pork rather than bacon, there'd be no reason to season with salt. The salt pork would do well enough. We're going to watch this for a while. We'll keep track of how long it takes. We'll get some images of it cooking for you, and we'll let you know. We'll be back in a little while. Well, we're back. It's been about an hour and 40 minutes. We've stirred the stew pretty constantly because we don't want it burning on the bottom. One, burned food will be wasted, and two, it'll make the entire stew taste bad. We've adjusted the amount of heat to keep that to a rolling simmer, and we've got a stew ready to try. Of course, we made this for the entire group. That was what Camburn was after, to make sure he could feed his men. So Chad and I are going to go give it a try. Now, if you thought we had a ladle and all those fancy things, out on Picket, you don't have those choices. It's hot, it's delicious.
Perfect for a December night.
Absolutely. Camburn talked about this being a chowder. Well, the potatoes, the cabbage, and the hardtack have all cooked down. If you could find other things, this would probably be great with some turnips or some carrots or some onion. It's whatever you could find, but of course, you started with the bacon and the hardtack and sent men away to find something else. This is a great stew. It's an original recipe shared for us by Harmon Camburn of the 2nd Michigan. This is something he did in the field in December 1861. He also worked with his men to make sure everybody worked together to survive, and as an NCO, he led and made sure his men were cared for. 3 big tenets, from the food to working together to an NCO leadership. There's a lot to learn here, and there's a lot to find connection to the Civil War infantry with. For Civil War Digital Digest, thanks to our patrons, and thanks for spending your time with us. We'll see you in a few weeks.